conclusion, I thought this paper really provided a really nice recollection of the arguments of the conservative movement, and we haven't really seen any of this, at least not to my knowledge, and it really provides a nice, underlying foundation to further examine this era of conservatism and what impact that may have on politics either today.
Can you imagine that the conservative movement already had this nefarious center that was functioning by the 1950s? And how generally widespread was the idea that there already was this center to the conservative movement, as opposed to the National Review sort of establishing itself as a news center? That's clear?
Yeah. I think I can almost deviate from what your intention of the question was. The sort of paranoid style that Hofstadter talks about, sort of people with status anxieties, concerned about a rapidly changing post-World War II world, is something that the new conservatives, so to speak, of the 50s and 60s would have rejected, and in some respects the demographics reject as well. And there's been a variety of scholarship on this topic, but many of these people were new professionals working in defense industries in the Sun Belt states of the South and so on, who were not, who were representing in many ways newer developments that weren't concerned with sort of the pre-war isolationism that characterized and so on. National Review was really the first publication that combined a variety of elements above and beyond this idea of the status anxiety group. So you've got people who were espousing more traditionalist ideas, arguing that we should be standing on the shoulders of our predecessors and espousing traditional liberal economic principles, traditional Christian principles, although there was certainly a call for traditional wider Judeo-Christian principles. Not specifically the evangelical Christianity that we come to associate with the New Right in the 1980s. But you've got this strain, you've got a libertarian strain that's very concerned about the growth of the state and the dangers that poses for a free society, and then you've got anti-communism coming into play, a third leg really to this tripod of conservatism during this period of time. So it's a wider movement, and it's a movement that in some ways can be seen as fundamentally at odds with itself, and there are debates that come along over the course of the 60s into the future between people who espouse a more conservative view of, or a more traditionalist, view of society versus people who argue for the absolute least amount of government interference in society, that is more libertarian impulse, because those come to be very much at odds when you're talking about things like separation from the state or things like that. Legal issues with regard to funding would be another good example of where those are coming into clashing situations. But yeah, this is something wider really than Hofstadter is talking about, something a little bit new and different, and not just replacing this sort of older idea of people who are just not at ease with modern society. These are people who are very much at ease with many elements of modern society, even if they espouse very different ideals than those.
Any other questions?
I'm intrigued by the unapologetic conservative intellectualism. Those aren't your words, but that's what I heard you talk about the National Review being.
Yeah.
And it seems to me, in my observations, that I'm hearing less intellectual conservatism and much more emotional conservatism today. And I'm wondering where the conservative movement sits at. Do we still have the intellectual conservatism? I think David Brooks, who I love, who's my little sip of whiskey that I can't do without. it strikes me that maybe the conservative movement is much more bifurcated with lots of different layers of groups than the liberal movement, which seems to be able to speak to each other in a different way. I'm not hearing this intellectual, unapologetic intellectual conservatism as much as when Buckley did.
Yeah, I would tend to agree with you on that. I think that the conservative movement has come into more conflict, certainly since the 1970s and 80s, and especially I think in our contemporary climate where, I mean, just to cite one example that pops to the top of my head, William F. Buckley's opposition to the war in Iraq. You've got people who were foundational members of this conservative movement really coming into opposition with what we tend to think of as a conservative political view or set of views today. But the growth of things like neoliberalism or neoconservatism, disaffected liberals espousing a new and different kind of conservatism, it has served to fragment the movement, and it has served, I think, to polarize the discussion somewhat. And part of the luxury that conservatives circa 1961 enjoyed, of course, was the fact that they were free in some respects to make the more intellectual arguments, to talk about things in a more theoretical sphere, because they simply didn't hold the keys to power yet, even as they were coming into their own in the Republican Party, and certainly, enjoyed a very dominant role in the Republican Party by 1964, being able to nominate Barry Goldwater as their representative for the presidency. They weren't disintegrating into sort of the more strategic arguments quite yet. They were still able to think about what their ideal role would be, and I think that makes a bit of a difference in what we see in the face of something like national review. This is their best case scenario, and they're free to make that argument without the complications of dominance politics.
Yeah, I didn't realize that General Walker was involved with the Overseas Weekly in terms of his indictment. I had always been under the impression that he was actually fired by President Kennedy. I'm sure it was, JFK wasn't micromanaging. He probably had to, at some level, say that the decision was to be done, right? What I knew about Walker was, and I'm interested in the connection here to, I think you're saying the National Review basically criticized the critics, the weekly Overseas Weekly. What I know about Walker is that when he went back to Dallas, he was very much involved in the John Birch Society. The question becomes, who put Lee Harvey Oswald up to taking a shot at him as he sat at his kitchen table the summer before the assassination? The possibilities, of course, that exist in terms of who Walker was involved with, and whether or not Oswald actually climbed up on the fence, looked over it at night, saw him sitting at his table, took a shot, and it ricocheted off the frame of the window and embedded itself in the wall, so he escaped assassination. Question is, was that Oswald? Was he framed? I'm curious as to whether or not you ran across any of how the National Review might have portrayed that incident after the assassination.
That's a good question. I was not actually aware of that story from James Walker, so I don't have first-hand knowledge of what National Review's outlook on that would have been. I know that following the assassination, the Kennedy assassination, they took an editorial position that this was a tragedy that reflected fundamental problems in American society, that this would even happen above and apart from any criticism they had of policies while in office. But yeah, Walker proves to be an interesting case throughout his period following coming back to to the United States, because certainly he's involved in all the riots surrounding the introduction of James Meredith to the University of Mississippi in 1962, and he was committed at that point in time, arguing that he suffered mental